going to be talking about speeding up the process of certification in order to bring scale to ARR projects specifically, but the need for speed in order to scale up supply on the voluntary carbon markets as they grow. That's the title, but we're also going to look at what's evolved with ERS specifically as a standard over the last few months. For those of you who don't know us, we certify restoration projects on the voluntary carbon markets and soon the compliance markets as well. Next. Agenda for today, we're going to have updates from ERS. We're going to look at what our timelines are for the next steps as we gear up to release version 1 of the standard. Part 2, we're going to talk about what are some of the changes that have happened post-public consultation. We did a public consultation that started in March, ended in May, where over 500 people participated. Quite a few changes there. And as we're going to do that, we're going to present the highlight of our revised standard. What are the main components? And then we'll have a quick Q&A session for those of you who want to go early to the break. If you don't have any questions, you'll be released. Next. Next. Context. Today you've got a major problem, which is if we achieve all of our reduction targets, we still need 2 to 6 gigatons of carbon removal to hit anywhere near 1.5. That's if we hit all of the reduction pathways. So you have to start wondering, great, we have the voluntary markets that are going to be able to generate some of that supply. How much carbon removal supply have we generated so far in the last 10 to 15 years? You're looking at roughly 100 million tons. We need 6 billion tons a year if we're on track with reduction targets. The gap is absolutely enormous. I'm not here to tell you that we need to focus all of our efforts on carbon removal and forget avoidance. I think we definitely need both. That's been very, very clear. And we can't achieve any of our objectives without not only doing both, but scaling both. But carbon removal needs to scale significantly if we're ever to have a hope to reach our climate objectives. If you look at the 3% of credits today that are carbon removal credits, those credits are predominantly ARR credits, afforestation, reforestation, revegetation. Within the ARR category, almost all of the credits are issued from mono or dual culture plantations of non-native species. Some of them cleverly disguised as agroforestry projects because there are also fruit trees nearby. There is room for those projects. There is room for large-scale plantations, but as this part of the market scales, we very much need ecosystem restoration that has positive impacts on biodiversity to scale as well. If ARR is going to become 20, 30% of the market, we can't have monoculture plantations be the only source of supply. And as many of you have seen, the VM47 from Vera was just released. Monoculture plantations will not be allowed further, even on Vera. Right? So it gives you an idea of where the market is headed. So we need more removal. We need more nature-based removal. We need more nature-based removal in a way that is positive for biodiversity. Next. In short, we need a pathway for planetary scale restoration. Next. As an organization, this is our purpose. We're here to certify restoration projects on both the voluntary and compliance markets. The first methodology we've worked on covers inland forest restoration projects of all sizes, including landscape scale projects. This presentation is about introducing the standard, but for those of you who already know it, it's also about flagging some of the key changes since the public consultation. First change I would like to flag, we originally were going to do mangroves and inland reforestation efforts. We've decided to simplify and just do inland reforestation efforts and restoration efforts for the time being to ensure that the methodology is as robust as possible and to build a separate methodology for wetland and mangrove ecosystems that's robust but standalone. We've also decided to increase the project size from mostly small to medium projects to projects of all sizes, including landscape scale projects. We need this space to grow, and larger projects, 50,000, 100,000 plus hectare projects, are absolutely key to bringing that scale. The second thing is that we assess projects across 3 pillars. These are not co-benefits. These are mandatory for every single project. So, ecological recovery, that includes safeguards for biodiversity, carbon, and livelihoods. Again, these are not separate labels, they're mandatory. Other change you might notice, for those of you who know the standards, there used to be 4 pillars. We've merged the biodiversity pillar and the ecological recovery pillar. Third, our standard is built to align with ICRA, ICVCM, and CORSIA Phase 1. We'll be applying to ICRA and ICVCM in November. It's always risky to announce timelines in public, but we're getting close and we feel quite confident that we'll be able to launch the standard in November and apply then to both of those. CORSIA Phase 1 reopens in February, March, so we'll be applying to CORSIA Phase 1 in February, March. We've done a very thorough gap analysis and meet every single requirement. If you have any questions regarding that, I'm happy to go through the gap analysis and walk you through that. Next. Value proposition. Why is there a need for a new standard? We already have Vera, Gold Standard, Plan Vivo, American Carbon Registry, Climate Action Reserve, and the long tail of all the smaller project developer carbon standards. Here's where speed matters. Right now, you have most large certification bodies that are backlogged with several hundred, if not thousands of projects waiting for certification. That process takes 3 to 5 years, and even as standards are beginning to modernize and speed up that certification process, the delays are still going to be in the multiple years to issue the first credits. We've been working for 3 years to streamline both the certification process and the monitoring to ensure that we can have the same level of rigor, if not higher, but with a certification timeline that's 6 months instead of 3 to 5 years to issue those first credits. Part of why we're able to do that and how we're able to do that is the deep integration of digital MRV into our processes. We also have third-party auditors, VVBs, like everybody else, but we felt like it was very important to move towards satellite-based monitoring of the project, as well as apps, for example, that allow you to look at timestamp, geolocated data on the projects to understand what's going on a near real-time basis every quarter. The third thing is transparency. Now, this rule will piss some people off. That's fine. Can't make everybody happy, but we feel like it's important. And that rule is requiring transparency on project budgets and benefit sharing at the registry level. So project budgets and benefit sharing will be published on the registry for every project. For those of you who feel attacked by this, ask yourself why you feel attacked. But we feel like this is fundamentally a good thing. All we're requiring is transparency. We're not specifying how much you need to give in benefit sharing. If you want to give 0 in benefit sharing, you can go ahead and do that. All we ask for is transparency and disclosure. Next. Journey so far. So for those of you who don't know us very quickly, we are not brand new, although we've been quite quiet over the last 3 years. We were founded in 2020. We did a lot of research with the European Space Agency on the use of remote sensing to understand forest health. In September 2022, we did some pilot projects, raised a couple million from leading seed investors to scale up the production of the first version of our standard. we did the public consultation. We're getting ready to launch that standard and apply to the different accreditations, ICVCM, ICRA, or SIA. Early 2024, we're releasing the first certified projects. There are projects from Latin America, Africa, soon Southeast Asia, ranging from 40 to over 100,000 hectares in scale in the project pipeline. So stay tuned for that. Next. To end the presentation, I'm going to run you very quickly through our core 3 pillars. Again, all 3 are mandatory for the certification of a project. The first pillar is ecological recovery. Next. Next. Every project starts with their project site and a reference site. The project site, on the project site, they need to understand the local conditions and the state of degradation, and they need to create a restoration plan that's adapted to those conditions, to that state of degradation, and that's in line with a reference ecosystem that has been understood for at the very least 30 years, but there's a whole bunch of criteria for how to choose that reference site. Project developers monitor ecosystem recovery across 15 attributes every 5 years, and then they have specific goals based on the areas where they're weaker that they monitor on a yearly basis. Within this section, we have safeguards and guidelines for biodiversity across the 3 levels of biodiversity: ecosystemic biodiversity, species level biodiversity, and genetic level biodiversity. You might ask, what is a criteria for genetic level biodiversity for a carbon project? I would answer, what is the provenance of the seeds or plant materials if you're doing reforestation efforts? Why is that important? Because the genetic pool that you are maintaining as you are reforesting an area, if it's not including locally sourced materials, you're actually diluting the genetic pool of the ecosystems in that specific area. So that's the type of level that we get down to with these safeguards. Next. Carbon. Next. Everything you'd hope for and expect. Financial, legal, environmental additionality. The project longevity is 40 years, ensured by a buffer pool for that long. We monitor as long as we're alive as an organization, and even if we die, we have partnerships in place that somebody else takes over the registry. So if you're concerned about a 3-year-old startup building a registry, know that we have thought of that. Leakage is monitored quarterly using satellite imagery. We look at leakage at 3 different levels: the local level, so a 5-kilometer belt around the project area, the jurisdictional level, and we do not include international leakage because nobody does. Don't know how you would calculate that, and nobody does either. If anybody has an idea, feel free to let me know. Last point, all credits are registered on a third-party registry. We use APX, who runs 80% of the market at this point. You might know their parent company, Expansive. That is a little bit more well-known. Next. Livelihoods. Everybody talks about FPIC, but FPIC should not be, I think Naomi said this at the webinar we did, and I'm going to steal her words, Naomi from Integrity Global Partners. She said, we need to move from FPIC to FPOC. It should be free, prior, and ongoing consent, and we couldn't agree more. The approach is not only to get consent from all of the different stakeholders at the start of a project, but to have ongoing engagement with the communities, hopefully as partners, not just as beneficiaries. In order to do that, there is a very important process. You've got a restoration plan, you've got the carbon calculations, but you also have a social plan. And the social plan is sort of linked to a concept that we've introduced, which is social additionality. What is this project bringing to the local communities? What is it bringing above and beyond what would have happened otherwise? And in order to do a good social plan, you need to take into consideration the stakeholders' needs and aspirations, not just at the beginning when you write your 200-page PDD, as you would on a normal carbon standard, but you need to do that and update it on an ongoing basis. We require that at least every 5 years, that plan gets updated using further community consultations. What's really reassuring is that when you talk to some of the best project developers and you start introducing those rules, they're like, that's not a problem, we already do that, right? And we just need those best practices to grow and to be applied by everybody on the market, not just best students. Last one, transparency on project revenues and benefit sharing. We already talked about that. In terms of things that have changed since the standard got released, initially that rule was a 70-30 rule, where we mandated that 70% of the project revenues needed to go to the ground or to project activities or to the communities. We decided, following the public consultation, that that was too restrictive and that in many cases that didn't necessarily make sense because, for example, a project whose size is very small, if you try to certify a 13-hectare project, your fixed costs for VVBs, et cetera, are actually going to be quite high, and it wouldn't be feasible for those projects to ever apply. Same for very large-scale projects. There's breaking points as well for various reasons. So the rule wasn't flexible enough, and we opted for a transparency approach, and the goal is simply to have the markets hopefully allocate money to the projects that are allocating the most money to the ground. Next. Certification process is a 5-step process. Feasibility study assessment, that's done by us. Validation audit by a third-party VVB. MRV is done by the standard body. Auditing is done by a VVB. Again, MRV done by the standards body is quite unique. We're the only standards body to put that responsibility on ourselves. We strongly believe that certification standards need to get their feet wet. They need to have skin in the game, and that skin in the game is monitoring on an ongoing basis the projects that you certify. Next. In terms of issuance, you've got 2 units. You've got a forward representation of the final unit, which is the verified restoration unit that gets issued once an auditor verifies that the sequestration has taken place. The projected units are released after the validation audit and can be used as collateral. They can be sold, they can be traded, but they cannot be retired. These are not ex-ante units that can be retired. Just to be very clear, they are forward representations of a future unit that help with the contracting of projects early. Next. This is where I finish the pitch with a call to action, an important part of every presentation. We are currently building a coalition. If you allocate large sums of money towards projects, we would love to talk to you. If you are building projects, we would love to talk to you. I think it's very important to say here, as a certification body, we cannot and do not intend to broker trades between buyers and project developers. That would be a massive conflict of interest, and we have policies in place against that. That being said, following a framework that was popularized by Art Trees, we decided that building a coalition to drive demand for ERS projects in general is both something that we can do without any conflicts of interest and something that would be useful to both project developers and buyers looking to secure projects that are of high quality. If you'd like to learn more about the coalition, Victoria, if you could raise your hand. Victoria and I are more than happy to talk to you about what it means. Beyond just committing a certain amount to investing in ERS certified projects over the next 5 to 10 years, the part that's maybe even more important for us is to include you in working groups to help shape the future of the standard. This is V1.0, and we hope to make this methodology, the standard and the related methodologies evolve quickly and consistently over time to stay abreast to market developments and to the needs of various stakeholders in this market. If you have any questions, floor is open. If you're tired of hearing people speak and want to go grab some food and a drink, feel free to do so. I will not be offended, but I'll stay here, I think, to answer any questions, and It's been a pleasure. Thank you for your attention, and I hope we get to meet in the next few days. Thank you. Yes.
Thank you. Agnieszka from Equino. And apologies in advance for the direct question. It's
Go
just
for
because I find this really interesting. That's the first time I've heard of ERS. And certainly your value proposition is interesting as well. So the question is, what makes you think you're going against some of the established leaders and people who like buying credit certified by the existing organizations because they do give a good degree of confidence for buyer? What makes you think that there will be enough organizations who will want to buy credits from a new and untested organization instead of the big guys?
You work for Ecuador?
I do.
Okay, so we're in talks with Marlena and other people from your team, but we'd love to start a conversation with you as well. And the reason they and many other people in this room, I think, are interested in this new standard is not necessarily because the other standards are bad. I think there's a lot of Vera bashing going on in general, and I profoundly disagree with that. I had lunch with Devin Antonioli 2 weeks ago in New York, and I have utmost respect for the man and what he's built, and utmost respect for what Judith is doing in the transformation of Vera. I'm beyond excited to see what they're doing. My purpose and the organization's purpose is to grow ecosystem restoration as a category. 3%, a subset of 3% of supply is absolutely ridiculous. You have 8 million hectares of restoration happening in the world. Almost none of that makes it onto the voluntary carbon markets. To me, that indicates that there are fundamental problems in getting that specific supply onto the market. And by specifically addressing the needs of that supply, and it's going to sound silly, but something as basic as having 3 mandatory pillars is something that deeply resonates with project developers that are traditionally NGOs that have never gone onto the voluntary carbon markets, but never necessarily aspired to. When you tell them this is not just a carbon credit, we're also going to value the work you do on the livelihood side, on the ecological restoration side, because for them it's not a carbon project, it's a restoration project. Just that approach, I think, is bringing a lot of new supply into our pipeline. And what makes it, so that second big thing is speed. Speed. You can't grow this category if it takes 3 to 5 years. And that's why we're working very hard to We've been working very hard for 3 years to release something that's streamlined and that meets the highest bar on the voluntary carbon markets. My final word here will be competition in a free market is a good thing. I think it raises all boats. Today we have accreditation bodies, ICVCM, ECROA, Corsia. It is their job to decide what meets that bar. I think if we meet that bar, if other people meet that bar and bring competition into the market, I think we should welcome that. And I think we should welcome more supply of every type. We need to, for it to arrive faster, and we need it to meet as high of a bar as possible. So that's my response. But thank you for the direct question.
Hey, so just a quick question about the pillars, and you talked about your restoration plan, and then separately you talked about the social plan.
Correct.
How are you integrating the social, the community demands in relation to their restoration ambitions?
It's a fantastic question. Luckily, I don't have to answer that. The reason for it is it's up to the project developer to answer it, right? We provide requirements on both pillars. The project should have a holistic approach, should take a holistic approach, and it's up to the project developer to both integrate the restoration needs of the site and the needs of the various stakeholders. And the reason why I'm giving you this answer, not a more specific answer, is because the reality is it depends. It's very context specific and not even just locally specific. It's down to what are the degradation drivers? Are they linked to the community's usage of the land? Are they not? And if they are, in what ways can the community develop alternative means of livelihoods while putting in the restoration plan. So it's up to the project developer to show through the restoration plan that they are addressing the drivers of degradation before they even think about starting to restore. And on the social side, that they address any social reasons linked to the degradation in the first place, if those two things are linked, because in many cases, they aren't necessarily linked. We have some questions over there, yeah?
Good afternoon. My name is Jonas Frank from Remote Sensing Solutions. So we are developing digital MRV systems. You're saying that you as a certification body are doing the MRV internally. What are you doing that it doesn't become a conflict of interest for you?
I love the question. So we are the only standard that doesn't charge per ton or per issuance. We charge per hectare per year for the ongoing monitoring of the projects we certify. And in doing so, we aren't linked in any ways to the crediting of, we don't earn more money from over-crediting, and we don't earn less money from under-crediting. We charge per hectare per year for the ongoing monitoring. So we've changed the fundamental business model of a carbon standard. We're actually a much better stakeholder on the supply chain to do the digital MRV than a project developer. If you think about it today, you're asking a project developer to pitch to a standard. It gets verified by an auditor that the project developer pays. What amount of carbon credits they should get. And if you look at the methodologies, if you look at the VM 047, and again, this is not to pick at Vera, everybody does it this way. It says, and this is true, there are several valid approaches to estimating above ground biomass. And there are. But the problem is if you let the project developer choose what approach to measuring biomass and choose the assumption that go into that calculation, you tell me a number and I can get you there, right? Oh, you need what's your canopy opening factor? Is it 4? Is it 6 on your allometric equations? Bam, that's 20% more credits for you, right? And if you're asking a project developer, their incentive is to get as many credits as possible. And it's not that they're not well-intentioned. Even the best-intentioned project developers, it is in their interest to get as many credits as possible. As a standard that doesn't charge per credit, per ton, we're actually in a really good spot to say, hey, this is a conservative number because our reputation is on the line. If those numbers are not conservative, our standard is worthless. And so the conservative principle I think everybody talks about, I don't genuinely think anybody can say that they apply it when it's the project developer that pitches a number.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for an inspiring presentation. My name is Eveline Trines from Forum International. I think I've got a relatively simple question for you.
Go for it.
From your experience to date, the projects that come to your door, are they from large-scale owners, landowners, or do you facilitate also the type of grouped projects where smallholders can jointly submit an idea?
Great question. I'll answer directly and then indirectly. Directly, both. Indirectly, we don't do grouped projects. I'm really not a fan of the grouped approach. I understand the need for it, especially historically, because your fixed costs of certification historically have been so high, particularly due to the VVB costs, that it's not economically feasible to have the projects. And I think we all agree that projects of all sizes should be allowed to participate in these markets. The problem with the grouped approach is I've seen projects that have projects that cross maybe not geographical boundaries, but definitely different ecosystem types. When you're doing the audits for projects that include 20,000 smallholder farmers, you're taking a representative sample. You're not looking at all of the projects. I feel like the standards for looking at a grouped project approach are in a way less stringent than if you were to look at a single project. It's not as rigorous, in my opinion. The solution for me is not to group the projects, but to bring down the fixed certification cost to a level, and we haven't cracked this yet, right? But to start to bring that down to a level where you can bring smaller project developers as single projects onto the market. And then you can have people who package those as baskets to sell to large. I'm guessing Total will never buy a project that's 13 hectares, because the due diligence to do that would require you to look at tens of thousands of different projects, right? So you may have people that will group those later on, but at the certification level, we strongly believe that they should be certified one at a time. And just one thing for the person who was doing digital MRV, we're currently doing a benchmark of different AGB providers. That will be external to us because we just want the best solution to win. Feel free to come see me afterwards to participate in that benchmark. We'd be happy to include you. Any other questions? I'm allowed to have 2 more questions, is that it? Good.
Good afternoon, Rick Sols, also with Form International. Indeed, great presentation, interesting what's your journey. I have a question on ecological restoration. There's a lot of definitions going around, and one person hears ecological restoration and thinks, oh, you're building a natural forest and will not touch it. It will be primary forest in 100 years. Another person, I'm more on that side, I think, is also looking at productive forest, maybe build something back that also gives a timber product, yep. Maybe doing mixed species plantations. What would qualify for your methodology in that range, and what would be your definition you go by when talking about ecological restoration?
Yep. 2-part answer. The ecological restoration has a fairly well-defined definition. If you look at the Society for Ecological Restoration, they've done a lot of work in defining that. Some of the projects you're talking about wouldn't conform to that definition. That being said, it does not mean that they're not valuable. And so for this first methodology, we're looking at inland restoration to try to get as high a level of ecological recovery as is feasible. And so it's non-extractive from a timber perspective. There can be non-timber forest goods within the forest that are taken as long as it meets certain requirements. But these are not productive forests. If you look at the ecosystem definitions done by the IUCN, they've recently released an assessment of a red list for ecosystems. I will be quicker. Intensive land use, including forestry, is an ecosystem type. People forget that. People think of the natural world as the butterflies, the bees, and the birds, and they don't. This is an ecosystem, right? There are bacteria, animals living here. This room is part of a larger ecosystem. And so we will have methodologies that target forested areas, but projects for the first methodology that we have covers strict restoration. We do intend in having productive forest, mixed forest in a later methodology that is more adapted to it. We think it's absolutely essential that we eventually get there, but we have to start somewhere. So we started with a strict definition, but we will have other methodologies that apply to the types of project we need. And I think I'm out of time, so one more question. So we've got one more question, but yeah.
Okay, hello, my name is Azadeh from Better Soil. So do you restore soils because without soil there would be no above ground ecosystem? Yes. And if yes, how do you do it?
So within ecological recovery, we look at 15 sub-attributes. Several are linked to soil. Some are linked to soil contamination. Some are linked to how packed the soil is. Right now, that's being assessed on a 5-point scale, using, again, frameworks developed by the Society for Ecological Restoration. So we've adapted some of those. We would like to go much deeper over time, but I think it's going to take time for us to get to a point where we have the technology, we have that's at a cost that's low enough to do that in a scalable way. And to be perfectly frank, that we internally have the expertise to do this. And so if you'd like to participate in public consultation project, if you have things that you think we should include, where we don't go deep enough, we welcome any feedback you might have, because your entire work is around soil. Soil is one of the things we look at. You obviously know a lot more about soil than we do, and we would love to learn from you and adapt as we go along. Again, we hope that everybody in this room has something to contribute, whether it's the digital dMRV folks, the soil people. We need to build this together. That's part of why we're at these events. So it is included. I think the assessment can be improved over time, and we welcome any participation from people who can help us do that. We are, just very quickly, we do not include soil organic carbon in the carbon calculations. I think it is haywire that people take values from the literature saying it's the same ecoregion and the same country, so the value should be the same, when soil carbon is site specific. And so we, from a conservative principle, aren't able to include that in our methodology and sleep well at night. So we haven't included it. We do intend, once we believe that we have something that's robust enough, to add it in, but for the time being, it's not included. In parting remarks, everything, everywhere, all at once, as Rich Gilmore on LinkedIn would say, I think it's very true. We need more avoidance projects, or reduction projects now that it's now being called. We need more removal projects. We need more ecosystem restoration projects. We need standards of all shapes and sizes to scale up this market. And we're only going to do that if we work together. I think there's a lot of dissent in this market oftentimes, a lot of circular firing squads. I think let's be productive in the feedback, welcome any feedback any of you have, and let's work to make this work.